I'm going to get into frozen shoulder today. I love sharing all of this stuff about emotions behind your physical issues, and I'm just constantly racking my brain trying to work out what I should share with you. So frozen shoulder was one of my most favorite conditions to treat when I was in the clinic as an osteopath. And it's one of those ones that I really saw the deeper emotional connections. And it really frustrated me, this condition, because it has a really clear name of frozen shoulder or adhesive capsulitis, and I'll talk to you about how it presents physically because some of you may have it. It's one of those conditions that often gets missed until it gets really bad. But what annoyed me about this condition in the conventional world is that people were told that there's nothing that you can do about it, that you just have to let it run its course for 6 months or 3 years, which is a really long time. And 6 months is a really long time if you are in quite a bit of pain, and it can present with a lot of pain at night time. So I want to let you know that if you do have frozen shoulder, there is something that you can do about it, but you just need to see the right therapist. And I really want you to look into the deeper emotional stuff that I'm going to talk about today. So overall, your shoulders, regardless of what your shoulder problem is, but overall your shoulders are representative about your sense of responsibility. And people will use really common phrases like, I feel like there's the weight of the world on my shoulders. I feel like I've got so much responsibility in my life. And a lot of the time the responsibilities that we feel we have are ones that we put on ourselves, and they're not necessarily expectations that other people have of us. So the shoulders are also about your ability to express your boundaries. Another common area for boundaries is your hips and your pelvis around your sacral chakra. But if we focus on your shoulders, it's your ability to say no to things. So this is when I'm going to get into energetics. I always like to divide the left and the right side up and talk about the feminine or left side issues and the masculine or right side issues. So if you have right shoulder conditions, this is usually that you are using too much of your masculine energy, which is really around the physical doing, being very analytical, being very processed. But in the sense of the shoulder, it is that you're physically doing jobs, doing things for other people. Like, I use the example of going out and getting the firewood all the time, or yeah, I'll go and help you with this, even though your body's like aching a little bit, and you just ignore it because maybe that is how you think people will approve of you, because if I do this thing for you, then you'll like me. So you don't listen to your body, you don't have good boundaries, so you just go and physically do things. So this is where right shoulder issues can come up. And then I'm going to talk about the deeper emotions behind frozen shoulder emotions. Then on the left side, if you've got niggly shoulder issues or up here, it's usually the feminine aspect, which is around intuition, creativity, emotional expression. But I find specific for the left shoulder, it is more about you have your own emotional stuff that you need to deal with, and other people might be dumping all of their emotional woes on you, yet you have poor boundaries and you think that you should listen to them. And instead of respecting the fact that you have a lot of emotional stuff that you need to deal with, you sit there and you just listen to all of their woes, and that left shoulder starts to ache. So then if I get into frozen shoulder now, which is that condition that disappointingly so many people say there's nothing you can do about it. It is something that you often get taught in university as manual therapists, even higher up people who just say there's nothing you can do about it. And yeah, maybe there's not a whole heap that you can do for it physically, but for anyone in pain, there is so much that you can do for them emotionally to hear them out, what's going on. And I think that if you have got something like frozen shoulder, which can take anywhere between 6 months to 3 years to recover on its own, it's nice for people to actually see that they are progressing along the path, because when you live with pain and it's improving day by day, often you don't realize that it is improving. All right, so frozen shoulder, just the presentation of it, because this is something that I used to miss as a physical therapist. I think I missed 2 of them, and then from then on, I never missed another frozen shoulder. It has a really specific way that it seems to present, and usually it will come on for no particular reason. It might come on in conjunction with an injury, and that's where it can get a little bit confusing. So sometimes if you go get an x-ray and ultrasound and then you rule out that there's nothing else going on there, but you've got this shoulder pain, then I would be thinking along the lines of frozen shoulder, but there's a few distinctive tests that you can do as well. But frozen shoulder, it will usually give you, in the very early stages, night pain, and it will disrupt your sleep. And night pain is a little bit of a red flag, so you do want to go and get it checked out. But night pain that wakes you up. So this usually happens in what's called the freezing stage. There's 3 stages: freezing, frozen, and then defrosting or thawing stage. So in the freezing stage, this is where it can get really confusing. Lots of night pain, but you might still have a whole bunch of range of motion. And then during the day, you're absolutely fine. So talking about the physical, and then I'll get into the emotional aspect. Then what will happen over time is that you slowly start to lose range of motion. And this is maybe where some people go and engage in a little bit of physical therapy, but the physical therapy actually doesn't help, and they keep on losing more and more range of motion. So one of the things that a few movements that I get people to do is just, you can't really see me on this video, but you raise your arms up above your head. And when I'm looking at people, when they're stuck, what happens is they start to move their arm in front of them rather than directly to the side. So that's one sign for me. And then the other thing that I get them to do is, like, I hope you can see this, but scratch your back, top and bottom. So like the yoga bind. And usually what happens is they can't reach behind, so almost like reaching up and back to a bra strap. And sometimes people will get stuck around their lower back, around their tailbone, or they can't even reach behind their back. So doing things like reaching back for the seatbelt can be hard too. Then the other little thing that I do, and I'm really limited because you can only see this much of me, is I get them to lie face down with their hands on their head. And usually what happens is that this arm doesn't wing back. It'll just kind of stay stuck. So if I am monitoring someone on a physical level, or I'll just get them to do on a Zoom consult with me, I get them to do these movements, and those are the movements that just pretty much tells me straight away, coupled with a bit of night pain, that it's probably frozen shoulder. And over time, we can probably see that they will lose a little bit of range of motion. But what I think is really important if you have frozen shoulder is that you know that it will get better. Because when you're in the midst of pain for anything, it's like, oh my gosh, when is this going to be over? Is it ever going to get better? And frozen shoulder, literally, it's like this capsule just gets stuck down on the shoulder joint and it can't move very freely. And some people literally have about a centimetre of movement. They cannot reach out. They can't do anything with that arm. So it can be quite debilitating. So in the freezing stage, you get a lot of night pain and you start to lose your range of motion. And then all of a sudden, you get to the frozen stage. And there is no timeline on this. It can be a couple of months, it can be weeks, it can be a course of a year for someone. But once you get out of the freezing stage, it's so good when you get to the frozen stage, because usually the pain goes away. But then all of a sudden you're stuck with this shoulder that doesn't move and you don't know when it's going to start moving. I'll get to my physical therapy side of things, this is one of the conditions that I push to pain. Frozen stage, you're stuck and you don't have a lot of pain anymore. So this is good. And then you get to the thawing or the defrosting stage, which is slowly where your arm starts to open up and starts to move. And this is where physical therapy can really help throughout the whole process for your emotional state, but also physically. This is where you can really, really start to move the arm. Now, a lot of you are here to listen to the emotional stuff, so I'm going to jump to that and then I'll go back to what I do physically when I was working with clients. Or if I do still see people with frozen shoulder, I say, go and work with this person and tell them this is what they can do, or this is how you know if you're with a therapist who's comfortable working with frozen shoulder, because there's so many people that tell you there's nothing you can do about it. So emotional. I talked a little bit about the emotions of the shoulder and how it's around sense of responsibility and giving out too much physical energy on the right side and taking on too much emotional baggage when it's on the left side. But usually with frozen shoulder, as you can imagine, if it's this debilitating, there is a lot more sort of stronger emotion. And there is definitely a particular kind of group of people experiencing certain things that I notice frozen shoulder in. So it's usually high stress, but I have often noticed it around terminal illness. So either people who are terminally ill and maybe, managing other people's emotions or still trying to do a lot. But also for people who are dealing with or living with a loved one, a dear friend, a partner, a family member with a terminal illness. Because all of a sudden, a lot of the time, what I've experienced, what they've shared with me that's going on in their mind is, my gosh, this person is so much worse off than me. They don't have much life to live. So then you go and you give out all of your physical energy, even though you're just tapped out. Or you give them so much of your emotional energy because you're like, well, they're so much worse, I'm going to listen to them. They don't have much life left in them. So I'll be there even though I'm not dealing too well with all of the other stresses that are going on in my life. So terminal illness, either like people who are terminally ill, but also those who have got close ones or loved ones where they are trying to support them and maybe supporting them beyond their own physical and emotional capacity. Or in other cases that I've seen it is that the loved one is sick. It doesn't have to be a terminal illness, but this is the example I'm giving you, but quite sick, and there's a lot of distance, especially with COVID at the moment. I shouldn't say that because maybe my video won't get seen as much, but the distance that's happening is that people are not able to be there physically or emotionally for their loved ones. I see it in divorce, especially the divorces where it's not so amicable and there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of fighting and litigation involved. Workplace bullying is another one as well. And I think there's another one, but I can't quite remember it. But usually the really high stress situations, so divorce, bullying, and also, the whole thing around the terminal illness. And remember, shoulders are about boundaries and listening to your body, listening to the pain, the discomfort that's coming in. So, as always, if you want to be there to support others physically and emotionally, first you need to be there fully for yourself. And I know that that's just like such a cliche thing to say, but it is so true. And sometimes you don't fully understand it until you like drop into it for moments at a time, and then you start to drop into it more and more. So whenever stress is high or you need to look after family members, loved ones, external situations, I say you've got to be there for yourself first. And that would be working with all of the emotions that are built up that have become so full in your cup that they are manifesting as physical issues. Treating yourself physically as well. Now, you may not be able to do much on the physical level in the early stages for something like frozen shoulder, but you can get a lot of emotional reassurance that it's actually going to get better. Because remember, this whole course of it is like 6 months to 3 years. 6 months is a long time with pain. 3 years is a really long time where you're not able to move your shoulder. So then if I just dive into the physical aspect, I'll talk about a few of the conventional treatments that they do for frozen shoulder, and then talk about what I used to do when I was in clinic with people. Because when you've got this amount of discomfort and joint restriction where you can barely move your shoulder, you're a little bit scared and you don't know how far you can push it. And usually our body has an aversion to pain. As I said, this is one of the conditions that I would push through pain, into pain when I was in the clinic. But that's not what the human brain wants to do. The human brain is averse to pain. So surgically, if you were to go and see someone for frozen shoulder, there's a couple of things that they would do, and maybe there's a few more things since I really was looking into it, but they would either just give you a cortisone injection and maybe it would free it up, but maybe it wouldn't. I didn't see like the greatest success rates when I was in clinic with people who were going down this route, really high rate of reoccurrence. The other thing they would do is go in maybe under an anaesthetic or under a general, I can't remember, but this is like the capsule that's stuck down, and they would stick a needle in and blow up like with saline to stretch out the capsule. So they're literally just stretching the fibers. And then the other thing that they would do is surgery, where they would just knock you out under a general and just whack your arm back. So just take it where it should go. And then you might come out and you might be able to move it. But for me, Why I say you got to deal with the emotions is because if you don't deal with the root cause, the emotions that are stored in that area of the body, therefore manifesting in this way, this thing is just going to come back. It might feel like it's so much easier to just go and whip it under a GA or stick a needle in it, but often when it doesn't work, that is when you will start to address the hard things like your emotions. So when I was in clinic with people, I would lie them down and I would protect the front of their shoulder because it is a bit of a vulnerable position. And I would work on their neck and I would work on their back and I would often needle them. And what was really interesting was when I needled, because I used to do it quite strong and like get a big twitch reaction, is they would often come up in really black bruising. Cupping as well. If any of you have had the suction cups, I found that the reaction was like this black stagnant kind of bruising, which usually indicates there's a lot of stagnation and toxins in the skin. And then over time, as it improved, they wouldn't get much of a reaction, or it would just be nice and pink. So you know that the stuff has come to the surface and it's moved out. So yeah, I would just put my hand on front, and again, I can't really give a clear example, but usually with frozen shoulder, if you were lying down, your arm wouldn't go all the way back. It would usually get stuck around here. And then I would put my hand here and I would gently, not that fast, just like take the arm right back. And it was really interesting because I would often see people quivering, their arm, their whole shoulder was quivering, and you could see and feel their whole body tensing because they didn't want to let go. So one, it's knowing that I know this is painful, but it's completely fine. We're going to increase this range of motion and also show your brain that your arm, your shoulder can actually go that far back. But this is where the emotional stuff started to crack, is when I would reassure them that this pain is okay, but the quivering is like the physical release that I talk about. I always talk about when people release on a deeper level, it's physical, it's physiological, and it's emotional. So you'd have this quivering in the arm as you're taking it back into this range of motion where it's stuck. And when I would reassure them or just say, just let go, this is usually when they would break out in a sweat or they would be red. Often sound would need to come out because of the level of discomfort that's happening. And they would often break down in tears and not know what it was about. So it would usually be, okay, this can get a little emotional, but I want you to just let this go and your arm will probably drop back. I've got it, don't worry. I know it feels like I'm about to rip your shoulder apart, but I'm not. But what might happen is that you feel really emotional and let that emotion come up because you're not used to going to see a physical therapist who's going to tell you to cry. So it was letting them know that whatever they were trying to hold back inside of them was okay to let it out and let out sound. Some people would feel sick to their stomach, feeling this sensation, and it was really making sure that they felt safe to go back and that they really trusted me as well. Now, I have no idea how I first got into doing this with a client because it is now only because I got to see a lot of people with frozen shoulder and take them into this range that I could see the results and then take all of my future clients through this pain too. And this is where a lot of physical therapists wouldn't be willing to do that to you because it is fairly intense. And it was incredible. When people just let it go, when they really let the sound out, the tears, the anger, whatever was under there, whatever they were storing in their shoulder, as soon as they let it go, their arm would just drop almost right back. Sometimes it was 50%, which is still pretty significant. And then often they've got their eyes closed because they're like, oh my God, what is happening? Take me out of this world. And then I'd say, look at your arm. And they'd look and they're like, oh my gosh, it's like gone all the way back. So it's nice for their brain to see, okay, my shoulder can actually go there and I just need to let it go. It usually is quite tender when you come back out of that. But yeah, I just wanted to let you know that that's a condition. You can do physical therapy for it. You've just got to have the right physical therapist who understands the emotions, understands the physical aspect, and is willing to push some of the boundaries with your range of motion and ensure that you feel safe and comfortable with it all too. So then what would happen is over time, you wouldn't need to have this like forever and a day, maybe weekly for a few sessions, especially if you're in that thawing, defrosting stage of the frozen shoulder. And then you could just spread out. And then this is when I would start to give people exercises like child's pose, where you like, sitting on your heels and then reaching your hands forwards. And then eventually when people have got a lot of their range of motion back, like 90%, it's getting them to hang off a bar. And yeah, sometimes just like sitting, it's terrible because there's not enough space here, but like sitting with their arm behind their back. All right, so that is my riff on frozen shoulder. I'm constantly just trying to think, what haven't I shared yet? Or what is something new that I can refresh and share with you to give you insight into emotions behind physical issues. If you've got any requests, let me know. If you're new to my world, I'd love you to just have a look through the content, and yeah, especially if you are stuck with physical issues, mental imbalances, if you've got behavioral issues as well, where you've got addictive behaviors or you're a little bit OCD and you're trying to get on top of it. I'm really about getting to the root cause, which is usually emotions. But yeah, it's important to work out if it's an emotional problem, if it's a physical problem, if it's an energetic issue, or if it's a human experience and something that you need to do and take human action around. Cool. All right. Thanks for that. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon.